Good afternoon, students. Good afternoon. According to our syllabus, the English education in British India, how the English education responsible to emergence of new a class in Indian society called the middle class emerged. Okay, so we already completed the various concepts like downfall of Mughal Empire and political history of the later Mughals and East India Company, its policies, and how the East India Company's influence on Indian society. Okay, so within the part of the East India Company's influence on Indian society, the emergence of English education, you will see. So next, how this English education, main reason for the emergence of the new middle class has taken place in the Indian society. Okay, you'll see. Right. The first of all, about the English education in British India. Once the charter had mandated the company's responsibility for the education of the people of India, intense debates broke out over the implementation of the mandate debates that would only be resolved 22 years later with Bentinck's 1835 resolution. Although couched its grandiose moral terms, the political stakes in systemizing education in India were obviously the serious concern. Lord Bentinck, then the Governor General in Council, passed a brief resolution for the promotion of European literatures and sciences among the natives of India. This minute made English the medium of instruction in government subsidized schools and in effect made English the official language of British India. Although English became the official language of commerce and administration only in the mid 19th century. The influence of English had been felt in India long before this date. The earliest efforts to introduce English education had been the work of missionaries and private societies. As early as 1659, the Court of Directors had expressed their their desire to English, spread the teaching of the gospel. The Charter Act of 18, the Charter Act of 1698 specially included a missionary class. The contribution of missionaries to the development of English education was probably greatest in the Madras Presidency. The Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge and the Danish Mission had set up in schools there during the early 18th century. By the end of the century, Revered Shavard had established schools for the teaching English at Tanjore, Ramantapuram, and Shivaganga. The Baptist missionaries had similarly instituted various schools in Bengal for the dissemination of education and propagation of Christianity among the people. The missionaries had argued that English would be happy means of diffusing the gospel, which in turn would result in pacifying the natives. The efficiency of English had also seen acknowledged by colonial administrators from very outset. A dispatch of the Court of Directors in 1787 noted the utility and importance of establishing a free and direct communication with natives have been sensibly experienced during later war. Their acquiring a knowledge of the English language was deemed to be the most effectual means of accomplishing this desirable object. The directors were highly approving the projects that would enlighten the minds of the natives and to impress them with the sentiments of esteem and respect of the British nation. The officials of British East India Company, too, as early as the last decades of the 18th century, had recognized the political potential of English for building a massive imperial structure. In 1792, Charles Grant had suggested that English should become the official language of instruction at all levels. But at the time of British position was still under considerable challenge, and such a decision was deemed too dangerous. Rather, as this brief of recapitulation suggests, the institution of English was a slow and gradual process. The debates over language of instruction and subsequently the curriculum and the victory of English over indigenous language bear testimony to the inextricable connection of language to the power. The decision to promote English and the study of English literature was a result of complex historical and political forces, but uh, above all, it was prompted by the need to maintain and consolidated British supremacy, both economic and political. The desire to absorb India more thorough and effectively in the colonial nexus of trade and exploitation expressed itself directly in the education policies. More than anything, the administration, the company's territories in India required uniformity and centralization. And these were achieved in part through the introduction of English as the common currency of commercial, administrative, legal, and intellectual intercourse. The various twists and turns the educational debate took were always and invariably infected by financial expediency on the one hand and the immediate and local needs of company on other economy and utility. The watchwords of British administration were both achieved by the introducing English as the official language. It is also bare that although the question of language of instruction was resolved in 1835, the centrality of English in the lives. In fact, Macaulay was said to have sowed his seeds in prepared soil. Bentinck's policy derived as much from Macaulay's hope of creating a native comparator class, a class who may be the interpreters between us and the millions we govern a class of persons in Indian blood and color. But English in taste, in opinions, in words, and in intellect as from native demands to taught in English. It was not just the Indian elite who, after all, could afford to educate their heirs in private institutions, but all those who aspired to middle class existence and thus wanted, indeed, and needed to learn the English who were adamant. The exigencies of large scale trade and production led to new form of employment, setting in motion of degree mobility, virtually unprecedented in our history. Ishwar Chandra's journey to the city is only one example of this process. Increasingly, men flock to the cities and districts, towns to seek careers in association with the British. The first groups of Indians to learn English were the Dadani merchants, through whom the company made contract with the native producers of calicos and muslins. The company needed reliable dubasis, nothing but the interpreters, and munsis, the secretaries or scribes, to help them conduct a business. And so English became preferred means of communication and rather than a vehicle of enlightenment. Sir Thomas Roe, who has ambassador to the court of Emperor Jahangir, had secured extraterritorial rights for the company, carried out his transactions with the help of interpreters. On his visit to Surat in 1626, he was attended by some peons are olive colored Indian food boys who can prettily pretell English. By 1673, James Rennell, the company's surveyor general, estimated the number of interpreters who spoke English at about 1,000 in Bengal alone. Banayans are the brokers who carried on business with the mercantile and banking houses, realized the advantage of learning English. With its victory at Palasi, the company soon began to employ agents or gumastas who assisted them in a variety of ways, collecting revenues, keeping accounts, negotiating with the Mughal courtiers, and in some cases, managing household affairs. Access to these new professions who was largely restricted to the upper caste and subcaste who traditionally were the educated class, many of whom had barely awake out a living in the villages prior to the being employed by the British. With the expansion of British trade, educated caste Hindus in and around Kolkata, whether wealthy or not, choose occupations in newly formed British oriented institutions. With the permanent settlement, the creation of private ownership of property, litigations became common, giving rise to a new class of leaders. The bureaucracy, agency houses, and law courts offered new job opportunities. For all of this, some knowledge of English was a necessary requisite. The growing popularity of English education in first decade of 19th century is borne out by the success of institutions of English instruction. Mr. and Mrs. Marchman's boarding schools, which were founded in 1800, became the most popular and remunerative institutions of their kind in Bengal. William Carey mentions 20 such schools that had been set up in and around Calcutta, and even a few in the provinces. Unlike the charitable institutions set up by the missionaries, these schools were looked upon simply as source of revenue, and hence every individual in straitened circumstances, the broken down soldier, the bankrupt merchant, and ruined spendthrift, set up a day school. Carey himself advertised in 1800 from the mission house at Serampur at his institution. Apart from the instructions that was available in languages such as Greek, Hebrew, Persian, and Sanskrit, particular attention will be paid to correct pronunciation of the English language. The exorbitant rates charged and the curriculum of studies followed by most of these institutions further point to the demand for English language. Okay, learning English. These institutions, which rarely survived their founders, held out the large numbers the hope of jobs as clerks, Dubasis and Munsis, either in the offices of the East India Company or among the emerging indigenous bourgeoisies who had business dealing with the British. Not everyone could pay the fees charged by these institutions, nor were there enough seats to meet the growing demand. Often, the only hope of those wishing to learn English admission to one of the few free schools of the city. According to the contemporary reports, it was quite usual for poor boys to run after David Hare's uh, palanquin carrying, crying, "Me, poor boy, have pity on me, me take in your school." On his arrival in Calcutta, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar had been advised to do with the same. It was generally believed that his contemporary Ramatanu Lahiri had succeeded in gaining admission to Hare School by running after him for 2 months. Ramtanu was 13 years old at the time. This fact, the public preference, even desperation for English education cannot be adequately explained simply by looking through the parliamentary debates in England. nor was it only an expression of British desire to homogenize the indigenous population. The stories of Britain's reasons for instituting English as the official language and other indigenous populations' acceptance of it, despite areas of overlap, are not identical. What needs to be mapped out carefully for the circumstances that made it inevitable that English would supersede all Indian language in importance. Bentinck's policy on education assigned exclusive priority to instruction in English. In this, most of the Bengali leaders were in perfect accord accord perfect accord with the British to whom they owed their success and wealth. Wealth. The Committee of Public Instruction had noted with approval in 1830. A taste for English has been widely disseminated, and independent schools conducted by young men reared in the Vidyalaya, Hindu college, are springing up in every direction. It is worth noting that William Adam, who was charged with the responsibility of preparing reports on the state of education in Bengal and Bihar, uh, disagreed sharply with the policy of introducing English as sole medium of instruction. However, neither the British administration nor the leaders or Dalapatis or various Indian communities were swayed by his findings and recommendations. In fact, Bentinck did not even wait for the report to implement his educational reform. The formal education of English was for Bentinck certainly a foregone inclusion. Initially, there was a little intercourse between the emergent middle classes and British. The fear of pollution kept upper caste Hindus at a distance. For the majority, this exclusively remained throughout the decades of British rule. But a distinction needs to be made between the large number of Indians who learnt English in order to make a living and fabulous, healthy absentee landlords of Kolkata who were often not only fluent in English but who faithfully emulated the lifestyle of the European aristocracy. The political economy of colonialism necessitated a reorganization of existing class relations. Although Macaulay in 1835 had articulated the British ambition of creating a buffer class, it was Lord Cornwallis, Hastings' successor as Governor General, who had formally initiated the process. On one hand, he was deeply suspicious, even disdainful of Indian company servants posing the company of Indians from one position of importance. I think it must be universally admitted that without a large and well regulated body of Europeans, our hold of these valuable dominions must be very insecure. But on the other hand, through a quite different process of Anglicization, he helped to create a new landed gentry that replaced the old landed aristocracy. Cornwallis declared a goal had been to make everything as English as possible in a country which resemble England in nothing. It was also this class of Indians who had established Hindu College in 1817 in Calcutta, an English school in Benares in 1818, and the Elphinstone Institution in Bombay, a decade later to educate the sons of upper caste Hindus in English. The founding of Hindu College marks an important era in the history of education in India as the first spontaneous desire manifested by the natives in country for instruction in English and the literature of Europe. Okay, so Ram Mohan, who had been forced to several all connections with the Hindu college because of his own criticism of Hindu orthodoxy, founded an English school in Suripara and opened English instruction uh, class in his own home under charge of Mr. Moncroft. These urban elites were also active in Calcutta School Book Society and Calcutta School Society, both of which played a prominent role in the dissemination of primary education, at least in Calcutta. The emphasis in the curriculum, which included English language and literature, was on mathematics, geography, and natural science and English history. This education was specially designed to create certain class who assist in the administrative functioning of colonial state, was neither designed to be nor directed toward mass education. By the beginning of 19th century, a professional middle class began to emerge in Bengal. They were a peculiar hybrid drawn from various stations of society, holding the landholder. Neither land nor wealth was their insignia. It was Western education that marked them off. As early as 1830, Samachar Darpan noted that sons of divans, brothers of clerks, nephews of accountants, or grandsons of sarkars dealing with the disposable auction and sale of goods joined the Hindu college in numbers to qualify as teachers, writers, and writers. For this group of people, education meant social mobility. An editorial in the Friends of India, dated in August 1850, noted with the approval of the eagerness with which natives of native all castes avail themselves of the missionary schools. The intense interest in uh, the interest in study of English education, interest in learning English derived from purely pragmatic reasons for these groups. English was the language of the rulers. Its acquisition meant social and economic gains for those who came from inauspicious economic backgrounds and were uh, were otherwise without the prospects of jobs, without prospects of job. English was a technical language with a wholly instrumental purpose. If anyone became well educated in English, everyone respected him greatly. Observed a citizen in a letter to the editor, Parshodak. Increasingly, it was this section of the middle class that began to dominate tertiary education. For the aristocrat did not need much education, and the more impoverished simply could not afford college fees. Presidency College, for example, charged rupees 12 per month at the time when monthly lower middle class salaries did not much exceed that figure. The utility of English in the quest for upward mobility was not merely a perceived advantage. The British had slowly but surely began to formalize the use of English official purpose as early in 1829. It must be remembered the Secretary of Bengal government in letter to Committee of Public Instruction made it clear that unless English be made the language of business, political negotiation, and jurisprudence, it will not be universally or extensively studied by your subject. He recommended that a decided preference will be given to candidates for office who may add knowledge of English to other qualifications. The letter also noted that Delhi committee have also educated with great force and earnestness and the expediency of rendering the English language of our public tribunals and correspondence, the necessity of making known that such is our eventual purpose. If we wish the study to be successfully and extensively prosecuted. In 1837, English replaced Persian as official and court language. In less than decade, Lord Hardinge announced that Indians who were proficient in English would be given preference for all government appointments. Okay, and the Macaulay's recommendations, Oriental scholarship were discontinued. The government, in a resolution in 1835, categorically stated that no portion of the funds set aside for educational purposes may be used in printing Oriental books. Thus, extensive plans for the publication of Arabic and Sanskrit works were Sanskrit were Sanskrit uh, works were immediately suspended, as were medical classes held in Indian languages. English education became virtual the only means of social and economic mobility. So much so that parents were said to be anxious to give their children as large a knowledge of its possible, which means that they not infrequently incur an expense which would seem altogether disproportionate to their means. In the early part of century, the missionaries had noted commerce has raised new thoughts and awakened new energies so that hundreds, if we could teach them gratis, would crowd to learn the language. Whereas the missionaries obviously saw the instruction in English as the first step towards diffusing the gospel. The indigenous population grasped it as the stepping stone to economic prosperity. Lured by the possibility of long salaries, they were willing to pay out the pocket to purchase this precious commodity. Vidyasagar's reforms at the Sanskrit College were profiled by similar concerns. What these social reforms acknowledged was superior achievement, advancement of Western technology and science, not European culture as much. Nor did the envisage a total repudiation of traditional learning. Ishwar Chandra, for example, wanted a curriculum that would result in the acquired meant of largest store of the sound Sanskrit and English combined. Since he was convinced that such a synthesis was likely to produce men who will be highly useful in work of imbuing our vernacular dialects with the science and civilization of Western world. A sound education in Sanskrit was to enhance by three branches in English, namely history, mathematics, and natural philosophy. The alternative, as they saw it was Sanskrit education being educated by pundits and orthodox leaders of the community. Ram Mohan himself was the founder of the Vedanta College and was an editor of first Bengal newspaper, Samachar Darpan. He also wrote textbooks on geography, astronomy, and geometry in Bengali. In the Bengali weekly newspaper, Samvad Kaumudi, Ram Mohan wrote several articles on topics such as the properties of fishes and echo in acoustics. These were amongst the earliest scientific writings in vernacular. Similarly, Vidyasagar plans for reforming the curriculum were motivated by a desire to create an enlightened Bengali literature. It is no accident that both men viewed the system of education that was rapidly taking shape as elitist and expressed their personal acquisition to the exclusionary regulations of such institutions as the Sanskrit College. When the government established the Sanskrit College in 1823, only Brahmins and Radi Baryas were admitted. Ramohan and Vidyasagar's call for secular racialist education was a piece with their objections against those moribund structures of indigenous society, such as the destructive caste system, the practice of child marriage, the restrictions against the widow remarriage, and the prejudice against female education. On must also bear in mind that Ramohan and Vidyasagar both received traditional education and continue to value much in it. In any case, neither was convinced that British culture as such was superior to his own. Their reformist ideals led them to oppose the indigenous language training that most conservative sections of the society were educating in the name of tradition, even though their goals were surely circumscribed by their own class allegiances. In fact, the that English has not only continued but expanded its influence after independence points to the links between the colonial and post-colonial state. 45 years after independence, English remains firmly centered in the lives of Indians. Although the compulsory teaching of English has long been abolished in almost every state in the country, it continued de facto as in the early 19th century to be the language associated with social mobility, power, and privilege. Okay, so these are things uh, about the English education during the British India. Okay, so this is the end of my class today, and tomorrow we're going to see the emergence of middle class by learning English and Western education. Okay, so uh, I am going to end up my class today, and I'll meet you tomorrow at the same time. Okay, thank you once again.